everybody, and welcome to our latest Conversation Aviation podcast. My name's John Franklin, Head of Safety Promotion at EASA. And today on the podcast, I'm joined by Rebecca Lougheed, who's got 16 years experience as a pilot now. She flies for a UK operator on the 787. So Rebecca, nice that we could finally get a chance to do this. I mean, we talk quite a lot anyway, but to actually record it and have some discussion on a podcast is fantastic. Maybe you could start by telling the audience a little bit about yourself and your kind of journey in aviation, maybe.
Yeah, well, as you said, I'm a pilot. I actually did my flight training in South Africa many moons ago.
Wow.
And my first airline job was with a small European operator, CityJet. For anyone who's a bit of an airplane buff, it was on the BA-146 or the Avro 85 aircraft, which is great fun. It's like a giant small aircraft to fly. And then following that, I went out to the Middle East. So just under 6 years flying out there. Flying to 6 continents on the 380, so a lot of experience in every sort of weather condition, from the middle winter, very cold, very wet, very windy in North America, through to summer in the Middle East, which is about as summery as it can get, I think. And now I'm flying for a Gatwick-based 787 operator. We fly predominantly over to the US, which is great. It's my favourite area to go to, so that's good fun. And I have a little bit of experience doing sort of flight operations stuff on the side as well. So, yeah, very excited to be here talking about anything to do with flying.
And actually, it's interesting, because so we were going to kind of focus this discussion specifically around the summer challenges, and you've been flying quite a bit recently over the summer. How have what kind of challenges have you seen? Kind of specifically summer related, but some of these are, I guess, things that happen all the time, and some of them are things that are specific to this time of year. What kind of things have you been dealing with, you and your colleagues?
I think on a personal level, it's been a really exciting summer, because I think it's the first summer since COVID, if we're still allowed to say that word.
Oh God, it's scary.
Yeah, we want to stop talking about it. But it is the first summer, I think, that it's properly ramped up. And it's been brilliant, because we've seen the levels of passengers, the level of traffic. I think it's up sort of the 90-95% of what it was.
Yeah, I think we were just looking at it for the safety review, and we're at 93% of 2019 levels finally. And we finally start to see everybody properly coming back to work for the first time.
Yeah, so there's been this awesome demand, which is brilliant, but at the same time, it does mean there's a lot more of that kind of challenges. There's busier rosters, there's a bit more sort of fatigue to worry about. So it's been really exciting and really good, but also more of those sort of challenges. And then, as you said, there's general sort of summery ones. And I think summer always feels really good after winter, because winter is all de-icing and weather delays and misery, and everyone's a bit grumpy, and then you get through to the summer and you sort of breathe a sigh of relief, because you're sort of thinking all those challenges we always focus on so much in the industry aren't there anymore. But actually there's a lot of kind of smaller risks, smaller things, more insidious things which we maybe don't think about as much, and they don't happen as frequently. So when they do, it's a bit more challenging. As a pilot yesterday, I was coming out of San Francisco. It's a little bit hot out. It was a heavy aircraft because we're nice and full of passengers. But then you're starting to have to think about stuff like your climb restrictions, your takeoff performance, which runway am I going to use? The better runway, it's a longer taxi, so do I need to worry about my brake temperatures? On the 787, you don't, because it's a great aircraft. Little plug for Boeing there. These kind of smaller, indirect things which we're not thinking about as much. As an industry, we're not kind of talking about them as much. So yeah, there's a lot of things that can really creep up on you and catch you out. And I think that's the same at the pilot level, at the individual kind of ground handler, dispatcher, planner level, and at the big kind of operational level as well.
Do you find that, I guess a lot of your day is, you come for a particular flight and a route, you do that as part of a crew. And I guess, do you see one of the challenges then that wider conversation outside the two people on the flight deck during that flight, and how you have those wider discussions with other pilots and other people in the company and other people that that we interface with, from whether it's people on the ramp or cabin crew or whatever? Do you think, should we be talking more to each other somehow?
I think it's an industry-wide discussion we need to be having, and it's not just on the summer risks, but on all of that. I think in aviation, I find we tend to be quite siloed. So the pilots are sort of worrying about their piloting thing, and the operators are worrying about their big commercial side of stuff. And maybe we need to be having that conversation on things a little bit more. And certainly one of the biggest challenges we've seen this summer is the weather related stuff. And if you just deal with the challenge that has directly on you as a pilot or whatever your individual role is, it doesn't really work. So we need to be looking at the disruptions, the impact that can have across the whole industry, and really focusing on how as a team we can deal with that. Because without that teamwork, you're not going to have that resilience, you're not going to have that robustness of it. And if you just look at, the storm, I think it's Storm Hans has just been hitting sort of Norway and Northern Europe at the moment. Or if you look at the wildfires, which have been impacting Southern Europe, Spain and Greece, it's not just an individual airport, it's the airspace, it's the staffing, the capacity issues. If an aircraft gets hit by lightning, it's not just that aircraft that's impacted. Suddenly you've got other aircraft diverting, you've got an aircraft that's stuck on a stand and blocking it. Now you're having to pull engineers from their day-to-day roles to come and fix that. And you get this huge knock-on effect that disrupts so much a bigger thing than just that one aircraft that's impacted. So unless we're looking at dealing with these problems proactively across the whole team and everyone understands their role in how those kind of plans and contingency plans have to work, then it doesn't really fix stuff. And when we look at winter stuff, there's so much promotion on things like runway operations, impact from weather, but we don't do that half as much with summer. And I think we're kind of learning now that we need to be doing that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. So I'm as an engineer by background. We always used to find it interesting, just the whole discussion about how do we appreciate, if we're doing some work on an aircraft, how does that impact the flight crew, and then the same the other way around when something happens to the aircraft, all of the extra things engineers then need to do, and the more we can share those kind of experiences with each other. But I guess, when you've got tight schedules and all of that, it's very easy to just be very transactional, like you say, about the immediate problem.
That's good work, transactional. I like that.
Yeah, I know it's interesting because you were talking about that it's easy to get focused on the problem you have to solve here and now, and you solve all those problems. But I guess that's a challenge almost for any organization generally, is how can it step back and learn all of the lessons to make things better, whether it's for its people or just make the operation run more smoothly. I don't know how to get, it's funny, we always talk a lot here at EASA about, it's great occurrence reporting, isn't it fabulous? But I think the reality for most people is that, reporting isn't the kind of thing people do to help the system. Just, I saw something that could make things better. It's more, I'm just going to report, you just have to report the really bad stuff that happens almost. Yeah. Well, I don't think we normalise reporting how we can improve.
I think there's always a bit of a stigma to it, because you either feel like you're complaining about something, and unless you have a solution, what's the point in mentioning it? Or you kind of feel like you're admitting that you made a mistake or it didn't quite work out. So yeah, maybe as an industry we need to normalise that reporting, and maybe not call it reporting, but maybe it's just more having conversations. And I'm quite a big I like to encourage, or I'm trying to encourage, more conversations between pilots and ATC, because I think that's where we're really lacking as an industry. And I see going a lot into airports. I mean, this last July, I was having a little sneak look at the Eurocontrol figures. I'm a bit of a geek and I love their little pie charts that they do. And I saw that the biggest delays so far, the last 2 weeks from, I think, sort of end of July, have been weather and capacity staffing issues. And the most impacted airports have been Gatwick, Frankfurt and Munich. I operate into Gatwick, so that's quite close to home for me.
Yeah.
But the two big issues are ones that directly impact the pilots, they directly impact ATC, but we're not really talking to each other about it. So I think, it's not so much reporting as saying, hey, I've identified this thing, who can I talk to about it, how can we fix it, what solutions can we find? And I think post-COVID, we've been doing a lot more of that. But again, with the summer, with the ramp up, with the time that we all have to do these things, it's sort of falling to the wayside a bit. So I'd like to see a lot more of that happening in the industry, because I think that's where we'll really start to improve stuff and really start to see a lot of benefit.
And I think one of the interesting things, we talk about this quite a lot, is that in places where you might have a major operator, Air France and Charles de Gaulle and Lufthansa and and Frankfurt and places like that. There's probably there's a lot of discussions go on in places like that between the bigger an airline that might be the biggest operator into a place,
Yeah.
but where you've got someone you either flies less flights or just does one flight a day from their own hub that goes into other places, is how do they get to engage in conversations in all the places they fly to, where they might it might only be one or two flights a day, but in reality it still impacts the operation. And how do we get to engage in these kinds of conversations? It's a pretty tough one.
It's a tough one. We don't have enough time in the day, do we? And I think it doesn't always have to be a conversation, but maybe it's just considering the things that I'm doing, how they might impact other stuff. A flight I did recently, the captain did a lovely briefing to our cabin crew, but he started to mention things like the terrain we were flying over. And I'm sort of sitting there thinking, why are you telling the cabin crew about the terrain? Why has that got any impact on them? So I kind of said to him, like, do they need to know we're flying over the Rockies at that point? And he said, well, yes, because that's when they're going to be starting their service and it's potentially going to be a lot of mountain waves and bumps. So I like to explain to them what might be happening, what they can expect in a way that they can then think about stuff. So then it got me thinking, like, when I'm flying into certain places, what am I doing as a pilot that might be impacting ATC in a way that they don't expect? And how can we better think about that? So it would be lovely to have these big conversations and big sit downs, but as you said, it's not always possible. So maybe it's just a bit more of an awareness of how these things do impact stuff outside our direct role.
That's interesting. I love that thing about the pilot. I guess as pilots, it's not something anybody's ever trains you to do, is how to do do a briefing for the crew, and particularly the cabin crew. And I guess that's an interesting one, is where kind of understanding where the interfaces are between the different people, and almost having like a journey through the day of, okay, when pilots interact with the ramp staff at the gate, these are the things, and this is and almost the more we can provide just some thoughts for people, I guess. That's an interesting one. Well, I'm gonna have to write that one down and take that away for another piece. That sounds like has a piece of safety promotion written all over it. And if I maybe a good thing to talk about is a little bit, because as well as the flying, you spent a lot of time just engaging people in those conversations. You've got a website of your own that you've been building up to kind of have that kind of interaction. Maybe you can give it a little plug and kind of tell people about that kind of. I mean, that's how we got in contact, just because some of the stuff you were making originally with Ups Group, and famously the EASA fuel management guide that you made, the retro one, just so much inspiration in terms of how we communicate differently in aviation. I know that's a big passion for you.
Yeah, well, I definitely can't take credit from that because it came originally from Ops Group, and the whole ethos there is trying to explain stuff in a more human way. But yeah, since working there, I love trying to share information, and it's really just stuff that I'm interested in. But I love trying to share a bit more on that in a kind of interesting way. So yeah, my website's the aviationplace.space. And I literally just look at stuff that's happening in the world that might be impacting aviation, and just try and share a bit more knowledge, a bit more understanding on those things and how they actually impact people. And again, looking at some of the stuff that's happened this summer, from weather-related stuff to the heat, and I don't want to bring climate change into it. A whole can of worms I won't open. But it's had a huge impact across Europe. We've had some volcanoes on the outskirts of Europe that have been impacting stuff. There's been space weather going on. And it's all these sort of things that maybe we don't think about as much as we should, because they don't have an immediate direct impact on us. But if we can just build up a bit more understanding and a bit more interest in that, I think it'll really help the industry. It'll really help prevent disruption or enable us to be a little bit more proactive about it. And certainly from an individual level, a pilot level, there's a lot that I think I can do and other pilots can do to help that. And I think that across the whole industry, at every level, if we take a bit more ownership and learn a bit more, develop our own knowledge a bit more, hopefully it'll really help. So, plus I like telling silly stories, and I like making ridiculous graphics and things to encourage interest in stuff. So
I think that's the thing, is it's easy to so much material out there is just here's a thing, it's like Almost, it's not like, the reading equivalent of death by PowerPoint.
Here's a
So
thing.
it's,
That's a good
yeah.
description of a lot of stuff in the industry for sure.
And quite often we just give people almost too much information. I know certainly it's something we're guilty of is, here's something really important. Go read this 37-page PDF written in a 12 font with no pictures. And then we wonder why people, don't understand the topic, or, don't engage with it. And I think that's where, finding new ways like you are doing to just get people talking about things. And particularly, I mean, I think we're both quite active on LinkedIn, and people don't always necessarily agree with us, but
Oh,
half the time it's the fact that we had the discussion. We don't necessarily, everybody doesn't need to agree all of the time, but I think it's just great that the more people that get engaged in the discussion, the better.
yeah, it's just getting people talking, isn't it? And getting people interested in some of the stuff that's going on out there. Because I don't know, maybe I'm an absolute aviation geek, but I think some of this stuff can be really interesting if it's just presented in the right way.
I think that's one of the things I found is, I think as an industry there are probably more, we breed more geeks in that context than any other industry. I know somebody, I have a friend who I know somebody who works in the car industry, and I was really, they design car interiors of actually a car I really love, and I was really disappointed to find that when we were talking over a beer one night that he just really hates cars. And I was like, how can you design car interiors and hate cars? It's like, and he was an engineer, and it was just his job was to design car interiors. And it could have been a kettle, it could have been a dishwasher, it could have been an aeroplane. And you don't see that so much in aviation. I think people, you get into aviation mostly because you love it. You don't, I think it takes a lot of effort, doesn't it, mostly, to get into aviation.
Well,
So,
I read an interesting one recently. It was actually done by the University of Reading, which is my hometown. So yes,
excellent.
go University of Reading. But again, sorry, mentioning climate change here, but it was about the amount of clear air turbulence. And it's massively increased, and it's increased over Europe and particularly the North Atlantic, which I fly over a lot. So there was all this kind of science geekery going on, which I found really interesting. And they'd written it in this sort of sciencey report, which about 90% of it went over my head. But actually, when you dig in and you kind of pull out the practical bits, and I tried to do a little write-up on it, because there is a huge amount that still impacts us in aviation. Clear air turbulence over the North Atlantic, it's a huge thing. It has an impact on your fuel, on your routing, on your passengers, on your safety. So there's so much stuff, as you said, out there that's put out there. And I think if you start digging into it, you can find so much that's useful for you. But it's really having that time to actually sit down and do that. And yeah, it's about just having these conversations and I think encouraging a bit more interest in stuff.
And it's funny you say that about that topic, because we did in our first Conversation Aviation magazine, we did an article. It was an article about managing turbulence. And particularly with having seen the increase in clear air turbulence, and just statistically more injuries. In fact, particularly in the passenger transport industry side of the industry, more people get injured in turbulence events than in any other.
Oh, do they?
Anything else that happens, yeah. So even big accident, I mean, there obviously you have the odd, very small number, thankfully, of big accidents. But in terms of the thing that causes injuries, it's turbulence injuries that's kind of the biggest cause of injury. So in fact, at some point, I'm hoping to record a podcast with somebody I know from KLM to talk about particularly how they manage turbulence. So he's a cabin supervisor, about how they manage turbulence in the cabin. And
Would you just take a camcorder up and have them record a bit with everyone bumping around everywhere?
Well, there's some of the pictures that you see occasionally that come out. I've seen a few videos, but particularly the pictures of the aftermath, where particularly I've seen ones where cabin crew have gone through the top of the passenger service units above the passengers and stuff like that. It's like how people have actually survived some of these situations with minimal injuries is more by not say by luck, by the excellent design of those parts of the aircraft by cabin interior designers who are.
You need to get your friend who does the cars and bring him in to do a bit more padding on the ceilings.
Yeah, maybe that's the next thing. Maybe that's an interesting one. But yeah, so hopefully we'll come back and cover that one. So one of the, go on.
So I would say you should look into, because they're doing really interesting trials at Heathrow, I think, at the moment, or they're going to start to, and they're doing it in conjunction with CSAR, if I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah.
but they're looking at weight turbulence. So obviously we've got ICAO weight turbulence, then we had the new EU one brought in, and now they're looking at actually modifying it again. So there's like time-based separation, but they're looking at a lot of the business jets and smaller kind of jet aircraft because they take off a lot quicker and they climb a lot more steeply. So we're still saying, okay, they're light or they're very small, medium aircraft, so they need this much separation from a big jet. But actually they're taking off and climbing well above the weight turbulence. So they're trying to do these trials where they're looking at all the different individual kind of climb profiles and saying, well, maybe that one can actually take off a lot shorter after the big aircraft because it's just going to climb above it.
Yeah, so we're doing something more.
Weight turbulence too, which I find really interesting. I used to fly a 380 and be very proud that, you know, it's the biggest aircraft and causes the most issues for all other aircraft.
Yeah.
It's a really big thing again for all of us to think about, I think.
Yeah, it's in fact we've been doing quite a lot of work with the GA community, particularly. They actually an airfield up not far from where we are here in Cologne. They actually had a fatal accident that involved weight turbulence, and it's particularly in general aviation. It's something we see particularly when you have bigger aircraft flying, you know, at small airfields, even, you know, with big aircraft in GA terms at least, and particularly actually also have with helicopters, where if you have a bigger helicopter, actually the risk to the GA aircraft can be pretty big, and we don't necessarily always think about it. Yeah. And particularly if you've then got people who aren't professional pilots who don't, you know, the first time they experience it is when they get turned upside down by a helicopter vortex can be, you know, pretty freaking crazy. So yeah,
and that's another challenge because the higher number of aircraft, the more operations into airports. Again, Gatwick, I think it's the busiest single runway, and that's stuff that we need to think about. And during the summer months, it's busier. You've got more kind of thermal turbulence as well. So it's those kind of little things that don't always have an impact that we don't think about as much.
And have you seen that over the summer, particularly? Well, I guess in the air and on the ramp, just more aircraft, more vehicles on the ramp, and has that been a challenge to deal with?
Yeah, definitely. Again, it's that. I mean, it's lovely to see it so much busier and to see stuff in the industry doing so much better. But I'm sure, I mean, there's been a huge amount of recruitment. Airlines brought more pilots in. There's been a lot of more recruitment at the airports with the ground handling staff. And of course, the training impact there and the fact that you've got a lot of new people in this very busy environment. It's something to think about because, yeah, it's a big challenge, I think. There's a bit of a risk there, and we really need to encourage everyone to work together and understand that not everyone's going to be quite as up to speed as you want them to be, and just sort of managing those expectations and managing those risks a bit more.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key things, isn't it? Is that, you know, people might naturally assume that everybody knows everything that they're doing and they've been doing it forever, but the reality is, you know, what particularly with skills and skill gaps and, you know, not having enough staff in certain areas, there will be a lot more. You know, we're having a bit more turbulence in the industry and more turnover of staff and more new people coming in. Is that kind of giving?
Well, I'm new on my aircraft and I'm not great at taxiing it yet. So a shout out to all the guys on the ramp at Gatwick who are driving around. Like, look out for me. So.
I think it's an important one, isn't it? It's just being just kind of accepting that we're all still learning, regardless of how long somebody's been doing something, and that, the main thing is to work together. And in fact, I was reading one of my favorite books I've read recently is a book that applies the theories of improvisational comedy to a business context. So in improv, they have this whole yes and basically if you're in an improv, you know, on stage doing improv, you can't change what you've been given by the person before you. All you can do is accept what you've been given and then continue pushing that show to the next level. And it's kind of the same theory of that is in, you know, whether it's operationally or even, you know, places like where I work here at EASA or in a business context, is that, you know, you're in a situation, you can't change the situation, and you've just, you know, if you have a mindset that says I'm going to just deal with that and do the best I can and kind of help this situation get where it needs to go, I found it's been a bit of a game changer as a mindset. It sounds really weird, but
that sounds interesting. Well, it sounds terrifying because stand-up comedy and improvisation is literally my worst nightmare. I can't think of I have nightmares about finding myself on a stage having to do that.
Oh my god.
No, that makes sense because I think I mean, as an industry, we like to bring in procedures to deal with other procedures, but you can't plan everything to that degree. And I think we're starting to learn, especially after COVID, that it's not always about having a plan in place for everything, but having that level of resilience to deal with anything that comes in.
Mm.
And I think we're learning that a lot more. And it's important too, because if you over plan it and then something changes, it's not going to go well. I've had so many instances when I've briefed an approach to absolute death, and then ATC have given me something different, and I've sort of fallen apart a bit because I'm like, that's not what I expected. Whereas if I'd maybe briefed a different way, thought about the risks rather than thinking about, okay, if that happens, I'll do that, and if that happens, I'll do that, then I would have had that robustness and that resilience to deal with it. So yeah, again, as an industry, that's something we can definitely do. And
Yeah.
fire and weather conditions, and we don't, I mean, again, we think about the winter ones so much, but we don't think about those risks and those challenges with summer. And it's not about planning for every event, because you can't plan for a lot of weather, but it's just about building up that resilience from the operator level, how they'll deal with those disruptions, down to the pilot level, down to the ground handling level, and how they'll deal with it. And I think that's the way forward, isn't it? Hopefully.
That sounds fantastic. I think that's kind of, in fact, we come to the kind of close of this podcast discussion, but I would have one question for you to finish up. Then, is if you could have one wish, if Genie suddenly appeared and said you had one wish for the industry that they could solve for you now, what would that be? I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Oh my goodness! Well, you should have asked this at the start so I could talk about it for 20 minutes.
Well, we can still talk about it for 20 minutes. That's fine.
I think we haven't really touched on it, but I think it's well-being, and it's focusing on the people in the industry, and not from a really kind of flowery, huggy kind of way, but from the fact that we need to start looking at that, because we've tried to deal with all the disruption, all the challenges in the industry by bringing in procedures and bringing in, laws and regulations, and it has changed, it has improved it. But we're at a point now where those things aren't improving anymore. And I think it's because we need to start looking at how dealing with the people in the industry is actually the way forward to doing that. So looking at things like peer support, looking at things like projects which really increase ownership of individuals, looking at their well-being, their work-life balance. And again, during summer, this is a really big thing because it's lovely. Our friends are out in the sunshine, they're enjoying garden parties and barbecues, and it's the people working in the aviation industry which are missing out so much more of this. And if we start focusing on their well-being, on their work-life balance, then when they come to work, we're all going to be a lot happier. We're going to be a lot more motivated to help deal with stuff. So I think it's the people we need to be focusing on a lot more. And I know that's really naive. It's a really difficult thing to do. But I think that's where the industry is going to improve a lot more.
And I think as an industry, we're not necessarily very good at talking about that collectively either. Is that we have lots of conversations about well-being, with different people, but actually, as organisations and the wider industry, it probably needs a really serious conversation about the kind of organisations we want to create and how do we help them be more people-centric. I know people in organisations who want to do more in this area, but actually, where do you go to get the information? Most organisations I know want to do the right thing, but it's when you're busy doing the operation and all the other things, where do you go to find the good information, and what can you do to really help people? And often people do things with the best of intentions that it doesn't necessarily help. So
I think it's about finding small, actual practical solutions. And I don't think we need to be going in and saying, I'm going to solve fatigue today, because that's not going to happen. But maybe if we just focus on small things, small, actual, productive, practical things that just make a little bit of a difference, a little step at a time, I think that will really create a so much better industry for everyone to work in.
What a great way to finish. I think I love that quote. Just, how do we work together to create a better industry? That's,
talk and communicate and look after everyone in the team. And I think that's the way forward.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining me, and look forward to catching up on other things, and hopefully we can talk about, maybe we do another one on the winter a bit later on when the weather starts looking worse and see.
I love talking, so anytime.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Take care. Thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.